August 1945. The world had changed in a flash. Cities were gone, tens of thousands were dead, and the dawn of the atomic age had arrived. The bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the Second World War almost overnight. Japan surrendered, and the war in the Pacific came to a close. President Truman, once uncertain about the bomb, now faced the monumental task of managing its aftermath. The global reaction was a mixture of awe, horror, and disbelief. Truman's advisors emphasized secrecy. The Manhattan Project's greatest achievement had to be protected from prying eyes, particularly the Soviet Union, which was quickly emerging as America's new strategic rival. The world had witnessed the destructive potential of atomic power, but the full implications were only beginning to be understood. Inside the White House, Truman faced difficult questions. How should the United States manage this weapon? Should it be shown to the world as a deterrent or stored in secret arsenals? Could humanity survive the knowledge that one country now held the ultimate destructive force? Meanwhile, scientists who had worked tirelessly on the Manhattan Project reflected on what they had created. Robert Oppenheimer famously said, "In the moment of triumph, we recognized the terrible responsibility we had unleashed. The moral and ethical weight of their invention loomed over every discussion in Washington and Los Alamos. The first steps were clear. Preserve the secrecy of the bomb, assert American strength, and prepare for a world where nuclear weapons could no longer remain hypothetical." Truman understood that the atomic bomb was not just a tool of war, it was the foundation of a new global power structure, one that would define the post-war era. The war had ended, but the atomic age had only just begun. What came next would shape the next half-century of history. The world watched the skies in awe, but behind the scenes, a shadow war of secrets and espionage had begun. Truman understood that America's nuclear monopoly would not last forever. The Soviet Union, an ally during World War II, had been eager to obtain intelligence about the bomb. Reports indicated that Soviet spies were already trying to penetrate the Manhattan Project. The race for atomic dominance was no longer theoretical, it was inevitable. In response, the United States took immediate steps to safeguard its secrets. Special security divisions were formed to monitor scientists, military personnel, and even administrative staff. Oppenheimer and other project leaders were debriefed, and strict protocols were imposed on communication and documentation. Every blueprint, every calculation was tightly controlled, but espionage continued. Soviet intelligence had managed to infiltrate American programs in subtle, sophisticated ways. Klaus Fuchs, a German-born physicist working at Los Alamos, was secretly transmitting atomic secrets to Moscow. The Soviet Union's scientists now had access to critical information, accelerating their own bomb program. The geopolitical landscape was rapidly shifting. Truman, warned of the Soviet threat, understood that atomic weapons would define the balance of power for decades. Diplomacy, military strategy, and intelligence operations became tightly intertwined with nuclear policy. The Cold War was no longer a distant possibility. It had already begun in the shadows. In the United States, there were debates about public knowledge of nuclear power. Some argued for transparency to maintain trust, while others insisted on secrecy to maintain strategic advantage. Truman sided decisively with secrecy, believing that America's survival depended on controlling the knowledge of atomic destruction. The world had entered a new era, an era where the threat of nuclear war would shape every decision, and spies could tip the balance of global power. While the world celebrated peace, a silent war was raging, a war of secrets, betrayal, and unprecedented espionage. By 1946, it became clear that the Soviet Union was determined to match America's nuclear capabilities. Reports of espionage reached the highest levels of government. Klaus Fuchs, Theodore Hall, and other insiders had provided Moscow with critical designs, shortening the Soviet path to their own atomic bomb. Truman's advisors emphasized the urgency of staying ahead. The United States could not rely solely on its existing weapons. Accelerated production, stockpiling, and further research into thermonuclear weapons became national priorities. The Atomic Energy Commission was created in 1946 to oversee all aspects of nuclear research and development, civilian and military alike. The moral burden on scientists also intensified. Many had fought to end the war, believing that the bomb would save lives. But now, the technology they had unleashed was a tool in an emerging global arms race, with no clear end in sight. Discussions about responsibility Ethics and the future of humanity became central in scientific circles and in government advisory boards. The fear of Soviet retaliation influenced American foreign policy. Truman, determined to prevent surprise attacks, began planning strategies for deterrence and containment. The concept of the atomic umbrella emerged, maintaining enough nuclear capability to prevent any potential aggressor from considering an attack. At the same time, intelligence operations expanded. Counterintelligence units hunted suspected spies, and security protocols became increasingly invasive. The race was no longer just technological. It was political, psychological, and global. Every move, every decision could alter the trajectory of history. The atomic bomb had ended one war, but it started another, a shadow war where secrets were more deadly than bombs themselves. The stakes were now global. Truman faced decisions that would define not just America's military policy, but the fate of the entire world. The post-war years saw a massive expansion of the U.S. nuclear arsenal. Production at Hanford, Oak Ridge, and new facilities accelerated. Plutonium and uranium stockpiles grew, while scientists worked on next-generation designs, including the hydrogen bomb. The U.S. was determined to maintain a monopoly long enough to shape post-war negotiations and assert global dominance. Truman, advised by the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the newly formed Atomic Energy Commission, codified the principles of nuclear deterrence. The strategy was clear. America would maintain overwhelming nuclear capability to prevent any potential adversary, particularly the Soviet Union, from considering aggression. This doctrine became the foundation of what would later be known as mutually assured destruction, MAD. Internationally, the presence of atomic weapons created tension. Diplomatic negotiations with the Soviet Union were colored by the knowledge that America held the ultimate leverage. Truman's decisions were pragmatic, but the moral burden remained. Nuclear weapons had shifted the ethical and strategic landscape of global conflict permanently. Espionage continued to plague the United States. Soviet intelligence penetrated multiple military and scientific programs, including key nuclear facilities. The fear that America's secrets could be stolen drove more extreme security measures, often creating tension between scientists and military authorities. By the late 1940s, the atomic era was fully established. The United States had both the technology and the doctrine to dominate geopolitics. But the world now faced the specter of an endless nuclear arms race. The choices made by Truman and his advisors would reverberate for decades, shaping policy, strategy, and human conscience. The atomic age was no longer theoretical. It was a reality, with every decision carrying consequences that could span generations. By 1949, the world had changed again, this time irreversibly. On September 29, 1949, the Soviet Union detonated its first atomic bomb. Codenamed RDS-1, the American monopoly on nuclear weapons had ended. Truman, informed of the test, understood that a new tense era had begun, the nuclear arms race. The balance of power that America had briefly enjoyed was gone, replaced by a precarious global standoff. The consequences were immediate. Military planners accelerated production, scientists pushed research into more powerful thermonuclear weapons, and intelligence agencies intensified efforts to track Soviet progress. Espionage had succeeded in shortening the Soviet path to the bomb, and the world now faced the terrifying reality of two superpowers armed with unimaginable destructive power. Truman's decisions during this period set the stage for the Cold War. America's nuclear strategy became central to foreign policy. The concept of deterrence, first theorized in secret briefings, now guided international relations. Political, military, and scientific decisions were intertwined, and every move carried risks of catastrophic escalation. For scientists, the legacy of the Manhattan Project had transformed from a wartime necessity to a permanent ethical dilemma. They had created the ultimate weapon, and now they had to live with the reality that their creation would define global politics, security, and morality for decades. The atomic age had truly begun. The era of secrecy, espionage, deterrence, and global tension would dominate the second half of the 20th century. Truman's choices, the scientists' work, and the espionage that followed had reshaped the world forever. Humanity had crossed a threshold. The nuclear arms race had begun, and the shadow of atomic weapons would hang over every decision, every war, and every negotiation for generations to come.